It's a done deal. The world's two largest economies sign a phase one trade agreement. Is this a new beginning? What does it mean for Beijing, Washington, and the world? We have live reports, reaction, and in-depth analysis.
Live from Washington, this is The World Today.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington. It's being called a historic agreement and a big step toward easing tensions between the world's two largest economies, U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese Vice Premier Liu He, putting their signatures on the phase one trade deal just within the past hour. CGTN's Nathan King begins our coverage from the White House. And Nathan, this is an agreement that appears to be good for both sides.
Well, that's exactly how both sides were painting it. It was a packed East Room just behind me here at the White House. And, you know, what was meant to be a half-an-hour event went on for over an hour and a half. You could feel that both the U.S. president and his team were very relieved that they'd been able to get this over the line. In fact, Robert Lighthizer joked that it was much harder than he thought. That's the U.S. Trade representative. And U.S. President Trump was effusive in his praise for the Chinese negotiating team and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Let's just take a listen to what U.S. President Donald Trump said.
It just doesn't get any bigger than this, not only in terms of a deal, but really in terms of what it represents. Keeping these two giant and powerful nations together in harmony is so important for the world, not only for us, for the whole world.
And it's very important, obviously, for U.S. Companies as well. In fact, the U.S. president went round the room naming the CEOs in attendance. There were quite a lot of them, getting them to stand up. You can tell that he's very, very happy that China will be making additional purchases. And he says that phase two, the next phase of negotiations, will begin right away as well. So there is some sort of momentum. And just, you know, talking about the mood in the room, you know, we've covered these trade talks since they began, 18 months of trade war. And I can tell you the atmosphere a lot more positive between the both sides today at this ceremony than we have seen. Both countries working in their national interests, and both managed to get a deal over the line, Asiye.
Nathan, what would you say are the big highlights?
Yeah, it's 94 pages, and I've read some of it. In fact, it was released as the U.S. president was making. Obviously, the headline is going to be China's commitment to purchase more U.S. goods. And remember, we were fixated on agriculture, as the president was. And basically what they've done is they've set 2017 as a benchmark and are saying that over the next 2 years, $200 billion worth of goods is going to be bought extra by China. Let's just go break it down for you. Manufacturing goods, 77.7 billion. Agriculture, 32 billion extra. Energy, that's like liquefied natural gas, obviously, and oil and coal, 52.4 billion. And services, 37.9 billion. And there's all sorts of phrases in here about how it's going to be implemented. But the key one for me was essentially saying that both China and the US it's up to them how this trade agreement was implemented. So there is no real demand from the US for China to make specific changes in its laws, which, of course, remember, was a major sticking point when both sides stepped back from a deal last May. There is also chapters on all the things that you would think about: intellectual property, ownership, market access, currency. It's a very, very detailed document, a lot more detailed than we were led to believe. But of course, $360 billion worth of Chinese imports are still under tariff. We've been trying to get some sort of clarity from the Trump administration about when those might be rolled back. Would it be incremental as they negotiate phase two? There's even talk of mini deals along the way. Or would it have to wait till the end? They have not exactly said how that is going to go. I don't think they even necessarily know yet. But there are some big structural differences between the US and China, and those very, very important differences will be much harder to negotiate in phase two. But, you know, the good news is, and I think the silver lining, is that tariffs aren't going up, tariffs have been rolled back, and we have an understanding between the world's two biggest economies. And the US president and everyone in the room echoed this. They all think it's good for the US economy, good for the Chinese economy, and of course good for the global economy as a result.
Nathan King, live for us at the White House. Well, let's turn to former governor of the U.S. state of Missouri, Bob Holden, who knows all about the impact of the trade war on America's farmers. He's now CEO and chairman of the U.S. Heartland China Association, and he joins us live from St. Louis. Governor, you've been a critic of the tariffs and this trade war. In your opinion, does this phase one agreement go far enough?
Well, it's a start, and that's better than we were before. And so I'm delighted that both sides are now sitting down and trying to find solutions, because it does impact our heartland region tremendously, because our economy is built around agriculture and manufacturing, and those are the two areas that have been hardest hit in the last couple of years with the difficulty we've had between the United States and China.
And talk to us a little bit more about that impact. When you talk to Missouri farmers, what did they tell you during this crisis? And what do they feel? How do they feel about this now, if you had to guess?
Well, first of all, farming is different than most other things. When you raise your soybeans, you can't put them in storage for 4 or 5 years and then bring them back. So they had a real loss of income over the last couple of years and what was occurring. So with agriculture and then too with manufacturing, now that both sides have really decided to sit down and talk, that's got to be a win-win for both if we get this done in the exceeding months.
And talk to us about how your organization, what it's done to sort of diffuse this crisis before this agreement was signed.
Well, we're working with agriculture farmers. In fact, we're planning a delegation of African-American farmers to China in the next year. We're also working with industry. What most people don't realize, most of the manufacturing that occurs in the United States, so much of it comes out of this 20-state heartland region, because we have been known as the manufacturing hub of the United States in years past, and we still play a very, very important role in that portion of the economy.
Governor, do you believe tariffs are the right approach in dealing with trade disputes?
No, I think what we need to do is be sitting down and taking a look at all of the different issues. This is only part of it, and as many people have said, this is really the kind of the easiest part of the negotiations. But the fact is, it's a wake-up call for both sides to sit down and figure out how to make it work, because we are the #1 and #2 economy in the world. And so it's critical to us, but it's also critical to our civilization that these two countries figure out how to make this work for both of them.
Well, some would argue we didn't even have to get to this point. Could all of this could have been avoided?
Well, and I've heard that argument on many sides, but that's the past. We've now taken the first step moving forward, and I think it's important that we continue to focus on how we move forward and how we address all of the issues that confront our economy and confront China's economy. My interaction, both in my own country, of course, and in China, is we have wonderful people on both sides. We just need to find those people, get them together, and figure out how to make this relationship work for both sides.
And how do you do that? How do you make that relationship work for both sides?
Well, I think the more that we can develop cultural relationships, educational partnerships, and business partnerships, that will help ease the stress. We just need to better understand both cultures so that we can all work together. And if we do that, I think we can be in a very successful time.
Governor, should Republican leaders in this country, should they be more vocal and public about the impact of these tariffs on their communities?
Well, I think it would be helpful for the American people to understand the impact if our public officials in both parties were talking about these issues and the future. Keep in mind, there's a lot of credit being made today about the significance of this signing, but this is only the first step. This should be our wake-up call to start trying to reach out to people in all sectors in both countries and figure out ways to make this work for both, because it's in both of our self-interest for us to do that.
And Governor, finally, are you optimistic that the enforcement mechanism put in place will ensure both sides are in fact complying with this trade one agreement?
Well, that's the reason we need to continue the dialogue and talking with each other so that we both understand where the other's coming from so they can find common ground. I mean, we've got two different countries with two different cultures, two different political systems. And to make it work for both the United States and China, we've got to find that common ground and figure out how to make it work there. If that occurs, then I think the rest can fall into place too.
All right, we'll leave it there. Our thanks to Governor Bob Holden, former governor of the U.S. state of Missouri. We certainly appreciate it. Well, an upbeat mood on Wall Street with stocks hitting a record high. Let's see where things stand now after the signing. CGTN's John Terrett is live for us at the New York Stock Exchange. John.
Indeed I am, RCA, and I can tell you we've had a difficult hour or two here since the signing ceremony took place. Look, here's the deal. First of all, you have to remember that there's been euphoria in this institution here. The fact that any kind of deal was approved at all, and we knew the signing was coming today. People have been very, very pleased about this, a real weight off their minds for the last couple of months. The Dow, however, was down in the early part of the trading today, Wednesday, because there was a rumor out there that phase 2 discussions may be in some way delay. But of course, President Trump put paid to all that in his comments at the White House. He talked about P2 starting soon. He talked about him going to Beijing very soon. And he said the tariffs presently on Chinese exports will come off once phase 2 is actually signed. Now, the markets were up for most of the morning going into the signing ceremony based on comments coming out of the White House from the likes of Larry Kudlow, the president's chief economic advisor, who was saying things like, you've never seen this before, this is history in the making, it's totally extraordinary, markets like that. But when the signing ceremony happened, there was a sell-off of about 80 points. Not a huge sell-off, but names that you might not be directly associating with the China trade talks. JP Morgan Chase and Walmart, the big supermarket, down ahead of companies like 3M and Caterpillar, which do a lot of business with China. And they were down less than 1%. And the Dow is still above 29,000. And in fact, at the moment, it's ahead by 143 points. So it's kind of come back a bit. I think what has happened is that basically people took that 94-page document that Nathan was talking about. They've been reading it. I think probably one or two people said, we're going to sell and get out of this and go on holiday. So the Dow was down, but now it's coming back sharply. In other words, I think they're trying to work out exactly what the details are in that document. That would be my assessment, Asiya.
John, you know the markets well. You know investors do not like uncertainty. It rattles stocks. Do you get the sense that this, to some extent, has put them at ease?
Well, I think the markets are a forward-looking instrument. They never look back, they only look forward. It does seem as if people really want to get into these markets come what may. I think they're very keen to see the detail. This will kick in 30 days from now. There is a slight worry, difference in tone between President Trump and Liu He. President Trump spent an hour introducing his friends and all the people who were involved in the build-up to the signing ceremony today. Liu He, on the other hand, pointed out that the US needs to treat Chinese companies fairly and said it will be a joint effort if this is to be successful. And I think the markets are a little tiny bit anxious that maybe China won't implement this deal in full, or that there will be something lost in translation from the English to the Mandarin. That's what they are anxious about. And for that, of course, only time will tell.
Indeed. John Terrett, thank you so much. Well, reaction is also coming from around the world. In the UK, a sense of optimism as the deal could have an impact on the country post-Brexit. Andrew Wilson has more on that.
Naturally, any sign of a rapprochement or reset between the Chinese officials and the American economy is to be welcomed, and it has been welcomed. Although I have to say, it's been welcomed cautiously on both sides of the Atlantic, both here in Europe and in the US, because it is only phase 1, and it's been touted as such. Very little has changed in terms of the details of what both the Americans are looking for and what the Chinese are looking for in terms of a new trade agreement, but at least the reset button has been pressed on turning the efforts away from antagonism and towards seeking for an agreement. Now, phase 2 could be as far away as this time in 2021, because Donald Trump doesn't want anything else to change before the election in November 2020, which means there's a long time, a long period now where agencies on both sides, from Washington and Beijing, will be concentrated on looking for other areas of agreement, which means there should be a period of calm. Now, the European markets haven't reacted to this very much so far. Much of this was already discounted because people knew that this agreement was heading for phase 1. But it's fair to say that in a post-Brexit UK, anything that stabilizes the big picture in economies around the globe, particularly the two major economies in the world, anything that stabilizes that picture is to be welcomed as the UK goes out looking for new trade partners after Brexit is completed, particularly with the US, but also, of course, with the Far East and China. So that in itself has to be welcomed. But here in the UK, as well as in the US, they are cautiously optimistic. Not much has changed, except that now there's an atmosphere of cooperation and repeated meetings, whereas before it was something of a standoff and therefore not constructive in any way.
And that was Andrew Wilson reporting. Joining me in our Washington studio is Frank Samolis, co-chair of international trade practice with the law firm Squire Patton Boggs. Frank, nice to see you.
Good to be back, thank you.
Well, this agreement, phase 1, certainly not complete. It's a good start, a partial truce. The Trump administration calls it an enormous win. Is it in fact a win for manufacturers? Is it a win for consumers? Is it a win for U.S. farmers?
Well, I hate to say it's too early to tell, but it is too early to tell. Remember, we're talking about phase 1. First of all, that's a new term in terms of trade negotiations. We usually have an agreement, and it's negotiated and it's finalized. Nobody knows if there's going to be a phase 3, 4, 5.
There's definitely going to be a phase 2.
There'll be a phase 2. That much we know. So it's hard to tell exactly how much time this will take to negotiate. As you've heard earlier, this was kind of the easy part. There were commitments made to make additional purchases. That's relatively easy in the grand scheme of things. And I must say, qualify this, I have not yet read this document, which was just released, but
it'll take you a while because it's over 90 pages.
90 pages, here we go. I will read that on my way back. But there's a lot of good sayings, but we have to see what the commitments are. Are they unilateral concessions? Are they bilateral concessions?
Well, let me tell you about one of them.
Yes.
China has agreed to buy more goods and services to increase its purchases over the next 2 years by $200 billion over the next 2 years. And that will be a 50% increase over 2017 levels. How doable is that?
Well, I would suggest maybe you ask the Brazilians or the Europeans. Remember, we're both members of the WTO. So there is some question as to whether or not it's legal for two countries to agree that you will buy exclusively from one. If China says we're going...
Because it could hurt the other country.
Yes, exactly. We're going to buy X amount of tons of Y commodity from you, the United States. If I am Brazil or the European Union, I'm going to say there's something called most favored nation status. There's Article 11 of the WTO. This is supposed to be non-discriminatory. I'm not saying that's in fact going to be the case, but we need to look carefully at the language of that commitment, to give you just one example.
And what about the enforcement provision? There is a mechanism in place to make sure both sides are in fact complying. Is that a normal procedure when you have a trade agreement between the world's two biggest economies?
Yes, we always have some sort of dispute settlement mechanism. You saw that in the new USMCA agreement the Senate's about to pass.
And does that usually work? Is it effective?
Well, that's the more important question. And the question is, what are the intentions of both parties? It's going to come down to how you interpret best efforts clauses and things like that. So it sounds good on paper. Let's see how it plays out in its implementation. Again, I say way too early to tell.
And Frank, one of the things we've heard during this 18-month dispute is President Trump basically touting these tariffs, saying China is paying for them and America is making a lot of money because of these tariffs. But that is not how tariffs work. Explain to us quickly, because I think people might believe that, in fact, that is the case.
Right. Well, it's not, in fact, the case. The fact is, from a legal perspective, the tariffs, the duties are paid upon the importation into the United States. The duties are paid by, quote unquote, the importer of record. But as a practical matter, that increased cost doesn't just stop there. It gets passed along the supply chain to the consumer. And I believe that was a major reason why President Trump delayed raising those Tier 4B tariffs in December, right before the Christmas season, because it was going to affect shopping not in China, but in the United States by U.S. consumers.
That's right. Well, we'll leave it there. Frank Samolas, thank you so much for your insight.
Thank you for having me, Sam.
Well, still ahead, moving forward with impeachment proceedings in the U.S., plus a major shakeup in the Russian government. The articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump heading to the U.S. Senate. Democrats who control the House of Representatives voted to send them and named 7 managers who will prosecute the case. CGTN's Owen Furclove has more from our newsroom. Owen, what is the latest?
RCA, this is quite literally the moment when the lower House of Representatives will send those formal articles of impeachment across the U.S. Capitol to the Senate, where they will form the basis of an impeachment trial for U.S. President Donald Trump and just the 3rd sitting U.S. president to be tried in the Senate. And the Speaker of the House of Representatives said that whatever the outcome, it was a reminder that this is a truly historic moment.
The president is not above the law. He will be held accountable. He has been held accountable. He has been impeached. He's been impeached forever. They can never erase that.
That was Nancy Pelosi, surrounded there by the 7 managers who will prosecute this case against U.S. President Donald Trump as early as next week in the Senate on 2 charges, obstruction of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, all relating to Trump's relations with Ukraine. And those Democrats have been obsessed with focusing on the fairness of this trial. They want to call new witnesses and they want new evidence, and yet Republicans have been steadfastly resisting this. Essentially, those Democrats want to try and find new evidence that would try and swing those Republicans who are loyal to Trump in the Senate. But if Democrats are obsessed with fairness, well, Republicans also want to stake out the moral high ground too. They think the House of Representatives has been highly partisan in its approach to all of this. They think effectively this whole process has been a witch hunt, and they think that they're best serving voters by resisting those Democrat demands. Here's the top Republican in the Senate, Mitch McConnell.
House Democrats may have descended into pure factionalism, but the United States Senate must not. This is the only body that can consider all factors presented by the House, decide what has or has not been proven, and choose what outcome best serves the nation. This, Mr. President, is what we must do.
And while all of that was going on at the White House, President Trump was signing the Phase 1 trade agreement with China. So he's been a little busy, but have we heard anything from him, any kind of reaction to the latest developments?
Yeah, that's right. I say, what a day and what a moment for all of this to happen, of course, with that trade deal being signing. Well, the president may have been distracted by all of that, but not too distracted to fire off a couple of tweets before that vote that took place a little earlier this Wednesday. Before that ceremony, that signing ceremony with China at the White House, he tweeted a little earlier in the day, "Here we go again. Another con job by the do-nothing Democrats." A very familiar tone by the president, who's insisted throughout this process that he did nothing wrong in his relations with Ukraine. He can take comfort, of course, from the fact that the Senate is controlled by Republicans, and it would take a 2/3 majority for those Democrats to convict and remove Trump from office, despite the fact that all of this in just a few days or so, if this trial runs to schedule, Trump will be live on TV, effectively in the dock in the U.S. Senate, as just the 3rd U.S. president to go on trial there. Asier.
It will be a remarkable moment. Owen Furclove, thank you. Now to a stunning political shakeup in Russia. The entire government has resigned. The move comes in response to sweeping reforms announced by President Vladimir Putin. So what does all this mean for Putin's future and cabinet appointments? CGTN's Julia Chapman joins us live from Moscow. Julia, what happened?
Well, this evening, we heard from Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev, who announced on state television that he and the entire Russian government would be stepping down. And he said that they were doing so in order to allow President Putin to make the necessary changes that he had outlined earlier today in his annual address to the Federal Assembly, that's Russia's legislature. And in that speech, he talked about a number of constitutional changes that he wants to implement and he wants to put to the Russian people in a referendum. And some of those changes would include giving more powers to the Russian parliament, to the Russian prime minister, and imposing some restrictions on the next president of Russia, his successor, when this term comes to an end in 2024, because of course he needs to step down. Under the constitution, he cannot run for another presidential term. He's already had 4. He had to take a break in between them to be the prime minister in between his 2 sets of 2. And now we are approaching the beginning of the end of the presidential term. And so this is why we're starting to get a glimpse of what could happen in Russia's future. Here's some of what President Putin had to say in that speech earlier.
I know that a constitutional provision is being discussed in our society that the same person should not be president for more than 2 consecutive terms. I don't think this is a fundamental issue, but I agree with that.
So President Putin essentially putting the restrictions on any successor that will come after him and really paving the way for him to still maintain his grip on power, but moving that position into a different one, possibly prime minister or the head of Russia's Security Council.
And Julia, among Russians, how popular or unpopular is this decision?
Well, as you'd expect, there's a range of opinions about this. We've heard from the opposition figure Alexei Navalny, who said that this is just President Putin and his cronies trying to maintain their grip on power for life. And so he's very critical of that. But there will be many people who do support President Putin and want to see him continue as the caretaker, as the figurehead of the Russian state going forward.
Julia Chapman, live for us in Moscow. Thank you. And a quick recap of our top story. United States and China signing their Phase 1 trade agreement. Chinese Vice Premier Liu He and U.S. President Donald Trump signed the deal during an elaborate ceremony at the White House. It's being called a historic deal between the world's 2 largest economies. It includes provisions to root out intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers and increase Chinese purchases of U.S. goods by some $200 billion over the next 2 years. The 2 sides are now looking to begin work on Phase 2. And that is the world today. Thanks for watching. I'm Asiye Namdar in Washington. News from China and around the world on our website, CGTN.com. The QR code takes you there, and we'll be back with more news at the top of the hour.